My people, how are you doing tonight? Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's 9 o'clock on the East Coast. It's 6 o'clock on the West Coast, and you can figure it out in between. But most importantly, it means it's time for another episode of the Naked Truth Experience. And I'm here once again, like I will always be here. I'm your proud host, Monroe, aka He Smiles, your essential life coach. And this is episode 30 of the Naked Truth Experience. I just want to welcome everybody who is back. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome, welcome, welcome to the community. Welcome to the family. If this is your 30th time or any time in between that, please, please, please say to yourself, thank you for coming back. Because that's what I'm saying to you. I appreciate you being here each and every single time. Listen, make sure as you're coming into the room, you are letting us know, where are you viewing from? Where are you viewing from? We got people. There was a woman who I was working with today. She told me that she is viewing all the way from Jamaica. So I appreciate the fact that we are actually transcending the U.S. borders. And that means the spirit of the Naked Truth Experience and the message of the Naked Truth Experience is getting out there. So please, at this time, go ahead and share. Let somebody know that you're tuning into the Naked Experience, and they should as well. Well, tonight, as I always do before we start off, I want to encourage you to please like, share, and subscribe. Social media is where we live. Social media is how we grow, but it's only going to happen with your support. So make sure you like, share, and subscribe on all of our social media platforms. And then we want you to become a part of the community that continues the conversation before and after the show. So join our Facebook group called the Naked Truth Experience. I am so delighted again to be back on the air tonight. Now, last couple of weeks, we did some things that were a little bit unorthodox for us. We had a shift in our time. We had a re-air due to the election. Last week, it was just me. And I was talking about the Trump and Biden Black America. I hope you tuned in. And if you didn't get a chance to, then you can go ahead and watch that here on Facebook or also here on YouTube. Both those platforms. But tonight I am back with some amazing guests. But before I introduce those guests, you know what time it is. It's time for me to tell you what I'm sipping on. But before I do that, one second. I got to tell you what we're talking about tonight. I know Julius, my producer, is like, hey, get it together. I need to tell you what we're talking about tonight. Tonight's topic is who is caring, who cares for the caregiver. Yes, it is National Caregiver Month. Family caregivers are super important to this society because they are caring for the most vulnerable loved ones, the people who have in many cases taken care of us and looked after us as we were growing up, and it is now our time to be able to do that for them. But I don't want us to just wash over that and say that it's all roses and you know it's easy, because it's not. In some instances, it's a thankless job, and I'm having some personal experience in my family with elders who are getting older and they're having some needs for elevated care and services. And so I wanted to bring this topic tonight so we could discuss the naked truth, the ins and outs, the ups and the downs, the good and the bad. But most importantly, we want to talk about how do we support our caregivers, because their self-care is so important. So we want to make sure. Now, let's get to our wine selection for tonight. My buddy Dan, who's all the way there in Napa. Dan, where you at, buddy? How are you doing today?
Hey,
there he is. There's my guy. How you doing today, man?
I'm doing well. How you doing today?
Listen, I can't complain. You know, yesterday was a little bit of a low day for me. I'm always looking forward to spending time here with my people on the Naked Truth Experience. So it's good to see your face, my brother, and I'm glad to be here. Now, let me tell you something, man. I've already started sipping on tonight's selection. So we've got the Conundrum, and Julius will let you guys know what it is we're sipping on, the Conundrum Red Blend. Let me tell you, man, this thing is amazing. It's amazing,
right? You know, one of the first things we talked about, that there's kind of a bridge between two wines. There are thinking wines that we want to think about where it came from. There's other wines that are drinking wines where we just want to enjoy them. I think this one hits right dead center in between the both. This is definitely designed to be great drinking by itself, like you said, and like a more expensive wine. Oh, and let's remind, it's about a $20 bottle. You find
$20 bottle.
About $20, 22, 18, give or take. But the beautiful thing is once we hit that $20-ish mark, we start to step into a couple extra things. We can think about it a little bit. It's got some great aroma.
Yes. Oh, gosh.
A little bit of dark cherry. A little bit of there's a presence of oak. Yeah. And without even having to think about it, it's super smooth and easy to drink by itself. So
it is, buddy.
I think it's a pretty good topic to have too, because conundrum fits the situation really well.
Listen, you don't even want it to get in this conundrum in my head about why we are even as close as we are in this race, but I ain't about to do that tonight because you don't want to get me started on that. That's the reason why I had a bad day yesterday. But we're here today. So I'm just going to focus real quick. Dan, let me ask you a quick question. So when I got this wine, instead of a cork, it has a screw top. Now, is there something? Because you tell me. My negative was I always thought if it had a screw top, that means it wasn't good wine. Is that true?
All right. So this is one of the biggest topics people ask about: is a wine better with a cork or not? So the old adage was this: cork allows wine to breathe, right? And so unlike a liquor or a beer, wine is a living organism. That's why it can change on your shelf as you age it. So, like an apple, when you bite into it, it turns brown because of oxidation. Yes. We're doing that with a real cork at microscopic levels. And it's almost like taking a roast and baking it in the oven, right? We're not letting that turn brown right away. We're letting it do it slowly over time. And those are the thinker wines, the ones that are engineered for that, right?
Okay.
Other wines, most of the wine we drink, 90% we want to drink now, right? Yeah. The cork is not going to make a difference, right? Yeah. Also, I like it to be well known that technology has gone so far. 20 years ago, we didn't know how to do packaging the way that we do now. Yeah. And glass has become cheaper, shipping has become better, and the technology for the enclosures has also exceeded. So I think that screw caps are super worth it.
So it's okay. It's okay. All right. I just want to make sure that I'm okay because let me tell you, man, this wine is amazing. Really quick, my sister actually, who's in Michigan, she asked, where can we buy this? Where can she purchase it from? She says it sounds delicious. So is it available across the U.S.?
Absolutely. You should be able to find this anywhere in the United States as part of the Wagner family wines.
Okay. Perfect. Listen, Dan, I appreciate you as always. And yes, we have a conundrum and I'm drinking it tonight. So listen, cheers, my friend. To you and cheers to everybody else who might be sipping. Man, take care and we'll see you next week.
Take it easy.
All right. Yes, quite a conundrum. But I want to go ahead and introduce really quickly both of our guests for tonight, our featured guests, and then we'll jump into our conversation. So first up, we have Miss Nadine Cornish Roberts. Let me say this first. Nadine Roberts Cornish, and she's an author, speaker, coach, consultant, and the founder, right, of a wonderful organization that helps our caregivers. Miss Nadine, how are you tonight?
I'm fantastic. It's good to see you, darling.
Oh my gosh, it's so good to see you too. We're going to jump into our connection in our segment in just a moment. So I just wanted to introduce the people and let them see them funky red glasses you got on. I love them. And then next we have Mr. William Parris. And William is a advocate for the Alzheimer's community, but he is also the chief creative officer for an award-winning show called Legitimate Matters. So he is no stranger to media. As you can see, he's got his background and his microphone there. William, how are you, sir? Welcome.
Monroe, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be on your show. I've been checking it out, so it really is my pleasure. Thank you.
Well, I'm happy to have you here, and we'll see you shortly. All right. Okay. So again, tonight we're talking about who cares for the caregivers, and we're talking about family caregivers. So let's go ahead and bring on Miss Nadine. All right. I'm excited. There you are. Listen, I was commenting on those stylish, those funky red glasses. I love them. Yes, I love it. How are you doing tonight? How are you?
I'm fantastic. I am fantastic. I am so much hopeful tonight than I was last night, and I'm in a good space. Absolutely. And I'm thrilled to be here with you. And y'all, excuse me, because I'm going to be saying darling and baby.
I love it.
Okay.
And you have that right, because here's a little bit of the connection here. This is always a family reunion on the Naked Truth Experience, but Miss Nadine, and you're going to hear me call her Miss Nadine because that's the respect I grew up with. Miss Nadine, actually, she's known me since I was like 6 years old, went to the same church. Shout out to Antioch Progressive Church. Her son and I grew up together. Shout out to the amazing poet, spoken word artist, Roderick. And I think he's an author as well. Yes. And so that is the connection. So when we were talking about the caregiver's burden and who supports the caregiver and even thinking about, I read your book. Julius, can you go ahead and show, Miss Nadine wrote a book called Tears in My Gumbo. And we're going to be referring to this a lot tonight because I read your book and it really, really helped me see caregiving in a different light. I always I like to start out with my naked truth to give the audience context as to why we're talking about this tonight. My family and I are actually entering into this area of caregiving, right? And someone who I love dearly needs some additional help now. And someone who I also love dearly is there full time helping that loved one. And, you know, we've had some very candid talks about the challenges that are taking place. And yes, also some of the joys and triumphs, but also some of the challenges that are taking place, even at this early on stage of entering into a caregiver relationship. And so I wanted to have a conversation because then there's also been conversations with, I'm a millennial, and I was doing some research on the number of millennials now that are caregivers and how that has impacted their, you know, their work-life balance and a lot of different things, right? And from generation to generation, it's a little bit different. So there's a lot that we can dive into, and I want to, and as always, we Black folks. So we're going to talk about the Black community and how it's some of the nuances of caregiving in the Black community. So, Miss Nadine, I just introduce yourself to the people who may not know you, and why do you do the work that you do, and what is the work that you do?
Okay, so I often say that this work chose me. I didn't choose it. Okay, this was not the vision that I had for my life 25 years ago, right? I was very much into, you know, what I thought was my life work. And then I got a phone call that changed the trajectory of my life. And that phone call was my mother's doctor informing me that she had been diagnosed with a pituitary brain tumor.
Wow.
That changed everything. That began a 15-year journey where I was my mother's advocate. I was her primary support system. And I was really fierce about protecting my mother and making sure that she had access to everything that I believed she deserved. And so that became a 24/7 job in and of itself. And I always say that my mother's journey, unbeknownst to me, was literally preparing me for the foundation that has served as the business that I conduct now and have conducted for the past 12 years, the Caregiver's Guardian. Without my mother's experience, without the complexity of experiences that she went through, I likely would not be in this position. But part of her legacy is the work that I do every day in helping families. My mother's been gone 12 years, and I get to talk about her every single day. And of course, yeah, it absolutely is. And of course, part of our bond is your beautiful mother, Monroe. And I'm so proud to be here today because I know how proud she is of you. I know she's watching over you.
Thank you. And you know what? Thank you for bringing my mother in the room. She's always with me, but thank you for acknowledging her in that way. For those of you who don't know, I actually lost my mother 18 years ago to breast cancer, unfortunately. And my grandmother was her primary caregiver. So I watched how my grandmother took care of her child, which I'm sure my grandmother didn't anticipate her having to take care of her child, right? So there was
Yeah.
kind of a reversal on the roles in that regard, and how caregiving usually kind of manifests itself. But so I wanted to talk a little bit about that whole piece where you say that you didn't choose this, it chose you. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I wanted to start off with caregivers accepting this role and this responsibility, because for many, while there may be some who can anticipate that there is going to be a need and they may have time to prepare, there are many people out there that one tragic situation, one instance in time may change their life and the life of their loved ones in a moment. So they may not be mentally, spiritually, emotionally, physically, at sometimes financially prepared to take on this role. So speak to the person who's like, this just came out of nowhere. How do I even accept what is now in front of me?
So that's the reality with 50% of my clientele, Monroe, that they literally, in a blink of an eye, life changes, right? And the interesting thing about life is that it just happens. It just happens. I encourage conversation about this, especially for those who are listening to this conversation now, and they're not there. I encourage you to have conversation and start to talk about it, because sooner or later, life is going to happen. You mentioned the millennials and the number of millennials. As a result of us actually being in this pandemic now, there are so many people who did not see it coming that are caring for someone that they never expected to care for. Yeah. And so it's all around us, right? And so part of the preparation is actually having the conversation. And having that conversation with people that you care about, people that you can look at and you can say, well, you know, it might be 20 years down the road, but let's talk about what happens when life happens. Yeah. You know, grandmama, do you have a long-term care policy? Wow. Yeah. Which most Black and brown people do not have.
Yeah, and it's expensive. It is expensive.
It is expensive. Yeah. It is expensive. There's no question about it. What we have culturally is, for those of us that grew up around our families, we have the cultural nuance of taking care of each other. It's what we used to do. But I would say over the last 25 years, that has started to shift, because so many of us move away from home. We don't grow up with our loved ones anymore. We are so long distance in terms of our association and our relationship, till when something happens, we are removed from it. And we don't feel like, well, that's not my responsibility. That's not an obligation that I'm even going to sign up for, because I don't roll like that, right? But I think one of the things that we as a people must get back to, number one, because of the sheer expense, the financial cost of long-term care, right? And that economically, most of us cannot afford a facility. Most of us cannot afford anything other than caring for our loved ones in their home or in our home.
Well, so, and when you talk about the economics, when I was looking at it, there's an estimated about 40 million Americans that are taking care of their families in some caregiver role. And on the in some caregiver statistics, it said it's estimated about 470 billion. Now, this was back in 2013, in the economic value of the care that these family caregivers are providing. When you and I were having our conversation prior to this show, we were talking about how expensive it is to have a decent facility for your loved one, right? And it's just a resource that many folks don't have, like, or not prepared for, right?
Right. And just an average, a national average for that is about 110 grand for the basics, okay? For a basic facility, no bells and whistles, right? That's on average what it is, and annually, the cost of care.
I want to go back to this individual who is now faced with caring for a loved one, whether that be a spouse, a parent, a grandparent, you know, a partner. You said something in your book that says caregiver may start in the role of a victim. And, you know, when you said that, that struck me, because it's like, as whatever that individual is going through, and then I'm going to say something else that you said later on in your book that also kind of came back to you. So you said the caregiver may start at the role of the victim, but then later on you said that the caregiver, right, did not ask in many instances to be in the situation that they're in, right? So how do you balance this piece on why me and feeling like the victim as the caregiver, and then having compassion for the loved one that they're like, look, I didn't want this.
Exactly.
I didn't want to put this burden on you. Can you speak to that person?
So I daily remind caregivers of that very fact, that you are in a position that you're in because unforeseen circumstances have happened and your loved one needs support, and you are the chosen one, right? And what I teach in my book is the 5 steps of conscious caregiving.
Yes.
I think it's imperative that you understand the steps of conscious caregiving so that you're able to evolve, right? Oh, and I love this graphic that you have. Step 1 is helplessness, right? And that's, everybody can relate to helplessness. I have no idea as to why I'm here. I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm scared to death. You only get a very, very finite period of time, a minute period of time to stay in the helplessness zone. You quickly move from helplessness to recognition. Recognition that as competent as you may be in every other aspect of your life, you got to go to school, and you recognize that you don't know what you don't know. And you really have to be open to support. You have to be open to help. You have to be open to the fact that you don't know, and be okay with that for a minute. And then from there, we move into process. And that's where all of the stuff starts to happen. You begin to recognize, okay, we are here. I am the most capable person at this point. I'm the one that's going to at least begin to facilitate this process. I may be the primary caregiver, I may not be, right? It's important, and process is where, Monroe, you begin to recognize what capacity you have around taking on this role, right? And then you're finding out, what are the resources? Financially, what do we have to make this happen? My loved one needs around the clock care, and I can't do it because I'm working 8 hours, 10 hours a day. Then we've got to be able to resource that. We've got to finance that. What government programs might be available based on my loved one's eligibility, where we might be able to get some extra assistance into the home, right? And then from process, Monroe, we go from acceptance. Acceptance. This is where we are, okay? I say one of the most profound things that happen during the caregiving journey is the recognition that you are going to be transformed in this process. You cannot continue to be who you are, operate in the vein of who you are as a caregiver. Caregiver is designed to transform who you are so that you can elevate to your higher best self. That is what it affords you. That's the experience that you can have when you are ready to accept the fact that, okay, I can't be who I was. I now have to elevate and allow myself to grow into a more loving person, a more compassionate person, a less self-centered person, and a more spiritual person, because caregiving allows you to grow and expand in all of those areas. And then finally is surrender. Surrender. We spend so much time in the caregiving journey trying to change and trying to shift what is. We want to change the experience when the experience is really happening to change us.
Listen, you know, when I read the 5 steps in the conscious caregiving, that acceptance and that surrender was like, whoa, because I think, you know, many of us have a challenge with just understanding what is and knowing that, like, but here's the thing, knowing that we are built for this time. right? And I think a lot of times the acceptance and the surrender is a problem because we don't have the confidence that we are going to be able to maintain what is going to happen, or to survive what's going to happen. I always refer to this book called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway.
Exactly.
And there's this one mantra in there, and she just says, whatever comes my way, I'll be able to handle it, right? And when we talk about it in the spirituality sense, if you believe in a higher being and source, then you know that like your spirit, your strength is undergirded, right, by that supernatural power, right? So I love that piece on the acceptance and surrender. I want to go ahead and let's hear from a viewer who I believe embodies what you just talked about. Let's hear from a viewer there in one of our videos.
It has been very rewarding for me as a person. I've grown. I am often not sure where I find the strength, but God, He provides that strength. And, you know, my personal life is sometimes affected. But luckily, like I said, thank God Daddy's not fully dependable where, you know, I have to be with him all the time. He helps himself. It's just that he's elderly. And it comes a time in that age where it's companionship that they need, conversation, chats, that sort of thing.
I love it.
You're right. That was my brother Raul, who's actually again international. He's over in Trinidad, but he's taking care of his father, right? He's the primary caretaker of his father. And in my talking to Raul, you know, he really kind of embodied what you were talking about in this conscious caregiver, and we'll hear from him a little bit later. Before we end our segment, I kind of want to move into this piece on where you talked about the role. So now that I've accepted the role of caregiver, I am going through these steps, and you talk about towards the end of your book about how a long-term caregiver relationship for, say, like a parent and a child begins to, sometimes we may lose the identity of child, and how important it is to remember that that is just as important, or if not more important, than that role of caretaker, and how sometimes we can lose that in the caretaking process. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Oh, without a doubt. So I used to have super caregiver syndrome. I wanted to be such an exceptional caregiver for my mother that I quickly forgot that the relationship that was most important and what she needed most was me to be her daughter. And I am so grateful that I came to grips with that before she passed away. The last year of her life, I realized she doesn't need this super caregiver. She needs her daughter. She needs me to curl up and get in the bed with her sometimes. She needs me to let her cheat and eat ice cream if that's what she wants to eat, okay? And I'll eat it with her, right?
Yeah.
Regardless of what the regimen is. We get so fixated in our caregiving role that we forget. And so that is something, I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's essential, that you remember your relationship, whether it's your spouse, whether it's your grandmother, whether it's your parents, whether it's a sibling, it's that relationship that they need more than anything else.
Yeah, that is beautiful. That is beautiful. Listen, Miss Nadine, we're going to go to our next segment with William, but of course we're bringing you back. And when we come back, we're going to continue some of this conversation, but really get into what are some of the supports that are available out there, not only through your organization, but things that you found on your own journey and your giving journey. So great to have you, and we'll see you in a minute.
Absolutely.
All right. Wonderful. I want to go ahead and bring on William Parris. Again, he is no stranger to the camera because he himself has his own show called Legitimate Matters, award-winning show, and I had a chance to kind of start checking it out. And you cover a myriad of topics in your show that are relevant to our community and to our world. But specifically, you have really dove into the world of Alzheimer's, and you've talked to a lot of scientists, top scientists. You've interviewed them. You've done talks and speaking. Can you, William, tell us a little bit about where that passion came from for your advocacy in the world of Alzheimer's? Oh, you gotta hit. Are you unmuted, my brother?
Sorry, Monroe. Even before I jump into answering your question, I just want to point out how much I really appreciated what Nadine was sharing. One of the things that really jumped out at me was that she mentioned that it just happens. You find yourself being a caregiver. It's nothing that you can ever prepare yourself for. One day your life seems normal, and then seemingly overnight you're a caregiver. And that can happen from so many different circumstances, whether, as you mentioned, your mom being sick, and people, develop all different types of cancers. In my particular experience, it had everything to do with my grandmother being diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And before we knew it, my mother was a caregiver. That was back then very complicated because, first of all, myself, my sister, we didn't really understand all of the various complications that would arise with my mother being a caregiver. My mother was a very strong Black woman, and she was determined that taking care of her mother was her responsibility. Unfortunately, there are many, many people, millions, I would say, who find themselves in a caregiver's position and are not aware of the resources that are available. And I also want to point out that in terms of Alzheimer's, I think it's important to mention on your show that almost 6 million people in America have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And African Americans are twice as likely to develop Alzheimer's disease than older whites. Caribbean Hispanics are 1.5 times more likely to develop the disease. But here's the part that's painful, Monroe. African Americans, even though they're twice as likely to develop Alzheimer's disease, are the least participants in the research and studies. And what makes that so tragic is that, as you said, I've interviewed some of the top scientists in this country, if not in the world. And as the researchers and the scientists aggressively search for a cure, if African Americans do not participate in the studies and the research, if they don't allow themselves to be evaluated, when those cures and the therapy is developed, African Americans will be left out because that information and what they discover will be based on whites, and it will not apply to African Americans. And we will once again be left out in the cold.
It's interesting because it actually alludes to next week I'll be doing a special with a doctor friend of mine on vaccines and the Black community. One of the things he'll be talking about is he's advocating for us as Black folks to participate in clinical trials. So again, we'll understand more, we'll understand better how long-term this affects our particular community. So it's interesting that you brought that up. William, you were referring to your mother in the past. And so your mother passed away, but I think one of the unique things, or maybe not so unique things in statistically, and we'll talk about that, is that your mother actually, in caring for your grandmother, actually passed away before your grandmother did.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, and when we were talking about this, and even with Nadine, she was telling us that I think something like 40% of the caregivers that are taking care of the individual actually pass prior to the one that they're taking care of. What do you attribute that to, in the case of your mother and maybe some of the statistics that we're seeing?
Well, again, I have to point out how Nadine mentioned these amazing steps for a caregiver to follow. But unfortunately, many caregivers take this burden on themselves, and they neglect their own health. And we know that many African Americans suffer with diabetes, heart disease, all kinds of other illnesses that require upkeep, required, taking medication and exercise. But unfortunately, in my mother's case, and hers is not unique, she neglected her own health because caring for my grandmother became a full-time job for her. And she just felt that it was her, nothing you could have ever said to her would have convinced her to put my grandmother in a nursing home because she just would not hear of it. But unfortunately, eventually, I got that phone call one day from my sister, and she said that the the EMT they were at the house, they were at my mother's house, and my question was, well, is it serious? And my sister said, yes, it is. And of course, I rushed. My mother was admitted into the hospital in ICU, eventually slipped into a coma, and she was there for weeks that way, unable to communicate. In the course of all of this, she had a stroke and ultimately passed away. And that was before my grandmother passed away. And honestly, one of the most painful moments or times in my life. I was so close to my mom. I don't even have the words to describe, the relationship between my mother and myself. And I'll tell you, Monroe, that back then, I was angry with my grandmother.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you that, and I was going to ask you. So elaborate a little on that, because I can understand, especially when from one mama's boy to another, I can understand that relationship that we have with our mother is sacred. So to see her pass, talk a little bit about that, like that feeling, man.
Well, at that particular time, there was so much turmoil, and of course, when my mother became very ill, it was gut wrenching for me, just gut wrenching. And I don't think I've ever cried so hard, not when she passed away, but while she was ill. As I said, not really making the connection with the disease that my grandmother had. All I knew was that my mom was sick and that she passed away. So I had this real intense resentment, and I kept it to myself. I didn't share it with anyone. I kept it inside of myself. But, I have to thank God that over a period of time, things happened and one door opened, and Nadine said that she didn't choose what she does, it chose her. And that's exactly what happened with my show, Legitimate Matters. And one door opened, and the next thing I know, I was meeting researchers and scientists for Alzheimer's, and I began to learn and interview and speak to doctors. And I ended up really learning a lot about Alzheimer's, and I was able to heal and understand that it's the disease, and that my grandmother wasn't responsible for herself being ill. But when you are immersed in a lot of emotion, and there's a lot of pain, and there's a lot of turmoil in the family, it's hard to see past that because you're just steeped in pain.
Yeah.
My message, I'm sorry, please go ahead.
No, go ahead. Your message.
I was just going to say, I was just going to say is that for those that find themselves in that situation, it's so important to understand what is actually happening, and by all means, get the help, because it's out there.
Wow. William, first of all, thank you for just being so vulnerable and sharing that. And again, as I disclosed in the beginning, I lost my mother when I was 21, and she was only 49. So, and I was her only child, and that relationship is just, so I understand the bond. And I thank you for just being honest about that, because that was one of the things that I wanted to bring to bear, is just that, like, how do you reconcile the anger and the resentment and the frustration that you have for the person who you love, but you feel like has caused such a void in your life, in the passing of someone else? Or if you are the primary caregiver, individuals feeling like they are sacrificing so much of their life. And, you know, we mentioned millennials now are, you know, a good portion of individuals that are now starting to take, I think it's 1 in 4 right now that are millennials that are starting to take care of. And there's this phenomenon where, because individuals are having to take care of ill or elderly individuals earlier in life, they're still raising their children. So they have children at home, and they're trying to take care of a loved one, and in many instances having to hold down a job so that they can continue to pay the bills. So there's this piece on where, you know, there couldn't be a lot of resentment and frustration that comes up. But for you, you talked about educating yourself or finding out different things around the disease. And I think that's important because it goes back to what Nadine was talking about in her book. Your loved one did not choose necessarily to be in this place. Your grandmother didn't want Alzheimer's, right? And you know, but we're human. So I just wanted to tell you how much that resonated with me, with you sharing your naked truth. So thank you. When you now, what's your outlook now post, you know, this experience that you've had? What's your outlook now on caregiving? What is some of the advice that you give to individuals who may be specifically caring for someone with Alzheimer's? How do you now direct them, and what resources do you direct them to?
Well, that's a good question, and I want to say to answer your question about how I reconcile this. Yeah. I have taken all of that pain that I've experienced, and I have rechanneled that pain into learning, understanding the disease, and now it's my part of my life's work and legacy through my platform to help others so that they don't have to necessarily suffer the way my family did. And there's an organization in New York, as a matter of fact, and it's called Caring Kind. And Caring Kind is on Lexington Avenue. The address is 360 Lexington Avenue. And Caring Kind has so many different organizations. I'm sorry, there's so many different resources, so that if a person is a caregiver, you can actually go to Caring Kind, and you can find ways to get another caregiver that you hire that will come in and just give you a break, because caregivers need a break. They just need a break, and they also. Absolutely. And they'll come to your home. Another thing that they'll do, because as you and Nadine mentioned, caregiving is expensive.
Yes.
It's very expensive. It could just destroy your finances.
Yeah.
But they also help you to understand how to manage your finances. If you have a person that's a caregiver, or a person who has Alzheimer's, as an example, and you do end up having to put them in a nursing home, you got to be very careful, because the nursing home, you know, will take your house. They'll take everything you've got. You know, so they will educate you on how to manage your finances. They have workshops to help you to understand how to be a caregiver. They'll help you to understand how to respond to your loved one when they have different types of reaction, because every person, I'm speaking specifically about Alzheimer's disease, every person every person that has Alzheimer's disease doesn't act in the same way. I interviewed someone whose mother, who was a caregiver for both of her parents at the same time, and her mother knew who she was until the day she died.
Yeah. Wow.
So, but because of all of the different ways that Alzheimer's or dementia affects a particular individual, organizations like Caring Kind and the Alzheimer's Association will give you the resources, the direction, and most important, the education to understand how to be a caregiver. And if you're not taking care of yourself, you're not helping the person that you're caring for, and you're certainly not helping yourself.
Yeah. Listen, William, with that, we're going to go ahead and bring Nadine back on, and we're going to continue our discussion. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Listen, we got everybody back in the room. Listen, I want to, from where William ended, that self-care piece. Nadine, I was all throughout your website, and self-care is at the forefront of why your organization exists, right?
Exactly.
For caretakers.
Exactly.
But I want to dive into something real quick for someone who says, I don't have anybody out there that can give me a break, right? Before we even get to the resources like Caring Kind and some of the resources that you'll share a little bit later, I thought it was interesting how you talked about sometimes we feel like nobody else can take care of our loved one like we can, and we would only have, and we actually make people feel inadvertently, right? Make people feel like they're not able to do the job.
They're inadequate.
Inadequate,
Yes.
right? Can you speak to that a little bit and how that kind of plays out, and sometimes how a caretaker may not even realize? And you said something that what's most important is not who does it, but that the resources that you need comes into play. So maybe it's not the person that you thought should do it. Maybe it's not the sibling. Maybe it's not the other family member, but maybe it's somebody else that can come in and provide the support. Can you speak to that a little bit, either of you? But we'll start with Miss Nadine.
Absolutely. I tell you, I enjoyed your segment so much, William. I'm so glad that you're here and that you're doing the work that you are doing. I think this would be a phenomenal show for the two of you to talk about sons who have lost their mothers.
Yes.
How your life has been transformed and what you are doing in honor of your mothers, right? Because that's what I got. But what I want to say to those individuals who are there saying that there is no one else. That, remember I said earlier that caregiving is a transformative experience.
Yeah.
So if your perception is that there is no one else in the beginning, then part of the transformation that has to happen is that you have to become someone receptive to allowing others to come in to support you.
Wow.
It is absolutely essential, not just for you as the caregiver, but also for the care recipient as well. The sound of your voice, you love the sound of your voice. But the person who's being cared for, that you're taking care of, after a while, they need to hear another voice other than yours. And so it is really incumbent upon you as the caregiver to identify a support system, even if it doesn't exist. You have to open yourself up to the possibility. And when you open yourself up to the possibility, that actuality and reality comes into play. But it starts with you changing your mind and your attitude around your caregiving experience and being receptive to others coming in to support you, because you need that and your loved one needs that.
Yeah. William, do you have anything to add to that? Just as far as even in your experience with maybe your mother maybe being receptive to help, or just, because you mentioned that's a strong Black woman who was like, this is my mother. I will take care of my mother. Or, and again, going back to Tears in My Gumbo, you talked about a spouse saying, I have to be responsible for taking care of my spouse. And it's almost like if the admission that I can't do it on my own somehow speaks something about my being a good spouse, my being a good child, my being right. And we know that's false, right? We know that's
right.
False. William, anything you want to add to that?
Well, I was listening once again to Nadine. By the way, Nadine, I'm just loving you. Just loving you. One thing that you said was that the individual has to, in my own words, let go. Let go and allow other people to come in. And I heard you say that, and I sort of chuckled in my head because I was speaking in a forum at one particular point to a group of people, and I was saying that looking back, I wished that I had been a little more forceful with my mom to get her to open up. And then I thought about that and said, I wasn't going to be forceful for her to do anything because there wasn't nothing I could do with her. Okay, once she made up her mind. But unfortunately, there are so many other people that just need to hear that it's okay to let go. It's okay to let other people in. And it doesn't mean that you're less of a daughter or less of a son or less of a spouse because you've allowed yourself to get the help. It doesn't have to be on you, and you don't have to carry the guilt. And I think guilt is a part of why so many people don't let go, and it's misplaced.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I want to talk a little bit about the responsibility beyond the life of the loved one that you care for. And to open that segment, Julius, I'm sorry, I didn't give you a heads up like I was supposed to, but I want to hear from Jan Bernard Williams, and she's going to talk a little bit about her experience in caring for her father, but how it actually went beyond the point at which he transitioned from this earth. So Julius, if we're there, sorry, brother, I didn't give a heads up like I was supposed to. He's going to be with me in the comments.
As a caregiver, the responsibility does not end when the person passes. Rather, the responsibility continues for them post-mortem, because as a caregiver, you still have to take care of their things, their assets, the people that they loved, and most importantly, their legacy that you as the caregiver are responsible for.
So, Miss Nadine, we'll start with you. What is your response to Jan's? That's been her experience as she, really kind of carried on the mantle of her father.
I think it's beautiful that she recognized that the responsibility didn't end when he took his final breath, that she chose to be responsible for his legacy. She wanted to be responsible for taking care of the affairs that need to be taken care of. In my book, I talk about the Anam Cara experience, and that is loosely translated as carer of the soul. I believe that the greatest gift, the greatest honor that you get to embrace as a caregiver is the honor of that relationship, of being able to care for someone that you love and companion them through their transition process. I think there are few things more profound and more beautiful than being willing to stand in that place and to support your loved one as they prepare to move from this realm into the next. And that doesn't end when they transition. You're still taking care of affairs. You're still putting things in order so that as your loved one has transitioned, you are preparing and really working to ensure that their legacy is what it should be.
But you talk about in your book, because your book not only speaks to the caregiver, your organization not only speaks to the caregiver, but you actually help individuals who may need help with advocating for their health. And you talk about in the book about preparing, right? Preparing, like having the living trust, having the will, having these things in order, which significantly help that individual who will carry things forward when you're gone. Can you speak briefly just about that? And people need to get your book so that they can know all the details about, what needs to happen. But how important is that preparation?
So the affairs in order portion is extremely important. I have an entire chapter of the book dedicated to that. Getting those affairs in order allows you to be the most effective and impactful caregiver that you can be. Because if you don't have power of attorney, if you don't have those legal pieces of those documents in place, then you can't be effective. You can't represent your loved one. You can't make decisions on their behalf. And so that is absolutely essential. And again, it's important to have the conversation when you can have the conversation. Don't wait until it's too late. If your loved one has been diagnosed and they're in early stages of dementia, now is the time to have the conversation about getting those affairs in order, about asking those questions. What are your wishes? So that you don't have to guess. You don't have to guess and make those decisions for somebody else.
I want to go to something, William, because you also definitely, of course, you've researched this. Miss Nadine, in your book, you talked about the, what was it called? It was the fib, what did you call it? When you talk to the therapeutic fibbing, right? The therapeutic fibbing, when it comes to basically, you may have to tell a little white lie, specifically, especially when you're coming to individuals who have cognitive, degenerative diseases, something like Alzheimer's, in order to get them to do something that may be in the best interest. William, I want to go to you. Did you see your mother or you yourself have to kind of work that in the therapeutic fibbing in her care? Did you find resistance from your grandmother at some point to some of the things that your mother was trying to put in place for her care? Curious about that.
Well, yes. My grandmother, as a matter of fact, was very independent. And as a grandmother, my grandmother, I remember I was like, what are you doing? First of all, she traveled around the world. Let's point that out. She traveled around the world. She taught herself to drive. She went back to school, got her bachelor's degree. So my grandmother was, she was doing her thing. Yeah. And so I was really proud of her because she really put her mind to things. But when she started to have the symptoms, we were raised in Queens, out in Rosedale, and my grandmother knew Queens and Manhattan like the back of her hand. And the turning point was when she was able to phone my mother, and she was lost. She was driving her car and she was lost. She knew how to dial the number and to reach my mother, but she didn't know where she was, and that was the clue. So trying to then take the control back so that obviously it's dangerous. And then you have to start handling her finances. And she resisted that. She resisted that. So that became a real struggle. Yeah. And it was very complicated. It was very difficult and painful for my mother.
Yeah, I find that, and again, and just all transparency, in kind of some lived experience, and when you have an individual who is very independent, like you're describing your grandmother, they're not trying to hear you coming in and trying to take some things over. So, Miss Nadine, how do you, just quickly with the time we have left, how do you counsel a caregiver who is meeting that resistance, and it's already stressful enough to now take on this role, but now you're meeting resistance in the things you're trying to set up to help your loved one? How do you counsel them through that?
Oftentimes you have to bring in a trusted or neutral third party. Okay. Because of the relationship, especially when it's a parent-child relationship or a grandparent-grandchild relationship, there's this hierarchy. And the thing that they're going to hold on to, they might forget everything else. They are not going to forget what your relationship is, right? And so it is really important oftentimes that you introduce a third party. And so I do a lot of family mediation and facilitate those kinds of discussions. One, my experience, my demeanor, and then my own personal experience from a big family. It's not much that I can't handle. And as a certified mediator, I have just been trained to skillfully listen and to help mediate and help families come to a meeting of the minds. And sometimes that's a one-on-one situation, but bringing in a neutral party, a trusted neutral party, oftentimes is the antidote to getting past those challenges and hurdles that you have to get past. Because that your loved one will be more receptive to listening to someone that they deem as respected, whereas you're respected, but you just got history and you got a relationship, and it's just difficult to break through that barrier.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Listen, as always, the time goes by so fast, so we're gonna have to wrap up. I'm sure we could go on and on, but before we leave, I want to make sure that we leave the viewers with some resources. So, Ms. Nadine, we had talked about some resources. First of all, your organization, you offer a free 15-minute consultation, but then also every Monday at 3 p.m. Mountain Time, you offer a phone chat support. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What are you offering to the people out there?
Absolutely. That's a full 1 hour support call where caregivers from across the country come on. They share whatever their immediate concerns are. If we don't have immediate concerns, then I'm sharing resources, I'm sharing information, and I'm stressing the importance of self-care. We get past whatever those barriers or hurdles are around self-care.
Yeah, awesome. And then you have a campaign going on right now, the 10-10-30. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
You got it. Thank you for asking. 10-10-30. That is 10 random acts of kindness and 10,000 books to caregivers in 30 days. November is National Family Caregivers Month. And 2 months ago, in the midst of this pandemic, myself and my team, we sat down and it's like, what are we going to do for caregivers for the month of November with a pandemic going on? And we decided we were going to launch the 10-10-30 campaign. We are going to give 10,000 books away, and did not mention my latest book, which is called Prayers in My Gumbo.
All right, Prayers in My Gumbo. All right.
Oh yeah, it's the gumbo series. Yeah. Chicken soup won't have nothing on us. Okay.
Come on now. Yes.
Oh, without a doubt. Yes. But Prayers in My Gumbo. Prayers in My Gumbo.
Yeah, I was gonna say I didn't even get into how much I love me some gumbo. I didn't even get into that. But we
talk about that we'll do that on another show, for real. Okay. Yeah. But what we want to do is we want to celebrate caregivers through random acts of kindness. And random acts of kindness does not cost anyone anything, right? And we want to create a domino effect. And so you can go to our website, tcgcares.com, click on 10-10-30 campaign, join the campaign, get information, ideas around what you can do for the caregiver in your life, and also see some of the amazing offerings that we have for pampering and loving on the caregiver in your world.
I love you. I love you. I love you. I love it. Thank you. Thank you so much. William, listen, you are the host and you're the Chief Creative Officer of Legitimate Matters. Where can we find you and how can we watch the show?
Thank you, Monroe. Legitimate Matters certainly can be found on YouTube. And I want to mention that we have a couple of episodes on my YouTube channel, Legitimate Matters, and they focus on Alzheimer's. So there's interviews with doctors where we explain Alzheimer's. We talk about cognitive types of tests and examinations. So there's a lot of information there. And we're also going to be seen through Jam Network TV. Legitimate Matters is now going national. So we're accessible on let's see, Verizon, Roku, several others. So, but definitely follow us on YouTube and subscribe. So we'll be happy to share more information.
Awesome. Awesome. I love it. Once again, I want to thank both of my guests, Nadine Cornish and also William Parris. Thank you so much for coming on tonight and talking to us about who cares for the caregivers, right? That self-care is so important. If any one of you want to follow up with these guests, please make sure that you can go to our chat group, join our chat group, because we'll make sure we'll drop those resources in there. Again, celebrate Family Caregiver National Month, which is all month of November. And then just in general, love on a caregiver. Love on a caregiver. And if you are a caregiver yourself, we love you, we appreciate you, we support you, and there is help and support out there for you, right? So I just want to thank everybody. Listen, we're here every Thursday night, so we still got a lineup for November. Next week, we are going to have Cedric Jamie Rutland. He's coming back, and we're going to be talking about vaccines and the Black community, because we got a vaccine coming up, which I know a lot of y'all do not trust. So we're going to talk to him and kind of break down some of the facts around that. Should we trust it? Is it safe? Is it going to be effective? And then this month also, I'm going there, y'all. We're talking about sex work is work. We're talking about the stigmatization of careers in sex work. So if we're talking about individuals who are exotic dancers or the OnlyFans phenomenon, right? We're mainstreaming a lot of this stuff now. And so I want to talk to that. I want to talk to a few people who are in that industry and talk about like, what is their motivation behind what they do? And we want to decriminalize and destigmatize that. And then finally, y'all, it is Thanksgiving month, but we understand that not everyone gets to go home to their biological family for a myriad of reasons. So we're going to be sharing stories of acceptance and love from our chosen family. So please, please, please make sure you tune in for our special Friendsgiving issue in addition of the Naked Truth Experience. As always, I need you to like, share, and subscribe. Like, share, and subscribe on our social media and let folks know we are out here. And then also make sure you join our Facebook chat group. It is always my pleasure, and we've ended another episode of the Naked Truth Experience. I want to thank my illustrious producer, J.U. Julius Jones, and I want to thank you for tuning in. As always, have a wonderful evening. Good night.